Good afternoon, and welcome to the second talk on the prayer of St. Ignatius of Loyola called the Examen prayer. The Examen prayer, as I said, last talk has 5 parts, and last talk I gave a brief introduction to the prayer itself, followed by the first step. And the first step, just by reminder, is that we remember that we're in God's presence. So it is, as we're about to begin that prayer, we just quiet ourselves. We find some place in our home in which we won't be disturbed, and it's quiet and peaceful. And again, in that setting, we remind ourselves that God is present. The second step of the Examen prayer is to ask for particular grace. St. Ignatius always is encouraging the person praying to pray for what you want, that is, to pray for the grace that you're seeking. In this case, with the Examen prayer, the grace that we ask for is that we may be aware or that we may see how God has been present in our day in this past 24-hour period. When I pray it, I sort of put that in my own words, basically asking God that I may see my life through His eyes. My life of the past 24 hours, that I may see it through His eyes. This request, this grace, has a certain presupposition. And the presupposition is that God is present, as we did in our first step, but also the second step, God is active. God is active in one's life. Oftentimes in our world today, or our culture today, that notion that God is near and that God is active isn't overly widespread. Rather, people's common sense, those who admit the existence of God or a higher being or a transcendent being, is that it is like God has created creation, and God has established those natural laws which govern creation. God gets everything running, and then God removes himself. The analogy given, the famous one, is God is the watchmaker. God constructs the minutiae of the watch, and then he winds it up, and then it starts to run, and God removes himself. He lets the watch just run according to the mechanism that he has created. And in a similar way, it's like God creates the world, puts those natural laws in there, and then has creation start to function, and God removes himself. And so in that notion of a common sense of how God relates to creation, how God relates to the human person, it isn't that God is close, rather that God is far off. It isn't that God is involved in one's life, but again, rather that God is distant. For St. Ignatius, to see God in all things, to see God in all things necessarily means that both that God is present and that God is active, that God is laboring within the person for that person's salvation, and that person's growth in freedom to draw closer in union with the Lord. And so we pray for the grace that we're seeking. That is, that we may be aware, that we may know, that we may see how God has been present in my day. Or as I pray it, that I may see my life through his eyes. If for whatever reason I miss the Examen prayer, and I go to bed and I put my head on the pillow, well, without the Examen prayer, I do not view my life correctly. Personalities are different. Some people see one's life as being, or one's day as being half full. Other personalities see it as being half empty. Well, I tend to be the half empty type. And so then, without the Examen prayer, I put my head on the pillow, and I think to myself, at best, this day has been neutral. And most likely, it has been a bad day. However, with the Examen prayer, again, with this 24-hour period, you begin to become aware and know how present God has been. How God has been present in a conversation you've had with another. And how God has been present in one's own heart. That sense of consolation, even in a moment of difficulty, in a time of suffering, we still feel a consolation. That is that call to continue. That call to continue within the context of suffering, be it one's own or another's, or be it the kindness of another person, or be it one's own kindness shown to another, be it in the graces, the gifts, the fruits of one's own prayer. Again, be it in works of charity, of seeking to serve another, or even to be served by another. Again, so this grace that we seek for, this grace that we seek is to see things as they truly are, not bleakly, as someone like me with my personality may see them, but rather that the scales be removed from our eyes, that we're able to see actually what the true landscape of the land is. That we're able to see indeed how God has been present, how God has been laboring. And this grace that we seek of seeing clearly, again, it's not so that we become a more efficient person or more productive, not even to be a person that is better ordered, but rather for St. Ignatius, it is always so that we may be free to cooperate more with God. As God is laboring for our own salvation, that we may be free to cooperate with God in our own salvation. We are in the first week of Advent as I give this second talk. And as we prepare to receive again that gift of that first incarnation, of that incarnation of the Lord, that first coming of the Lord in our lives. That with the incarnation we can see indeed God has assumed human flesh, which means that God is not distant or far off, but that the risen Lord is present. And out of love for you, he is active. Active in your own life, in your own heart, in your own mind, in your own body, for your salvation. And so we ask for the grace that we may see our lives through his eyes, not so that we can be more efficient, productive, or even better ordered, but that we may be more free to cooperate with him, to work with him, to labor with him, to serve with him, as he serves us in our own salvation. And so that's the second step. First step, you're in the presence of God. And now the second step, pray for the grace that you seek, that we may see ourselves through his eyes. God bless and take care.